Hi, my name is Pastor Hal York, and welcome to Truth in the Trenches. Today we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 13. He who shuts his ear to the cry of the poor will also cry himself and not be answered. Proverbs talks about poverty, a certain kind of poverty that comes as a result of bad conduct. Let me give you a handful of examples. Proverbs 10:4, a slack hand causes poverty. 14:23, mere talk tends only to poverty. 20:13, love not sleep lest you come to poverty. 21:5, everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. 23:21, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty. 28:19, he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. And these are people who are poor, become poor because of laziness, because of they just talk. They talk a good talk, but they can't work. They won't do the job right, or they won't do it at all. They won't get out of bed. They're a slave to their passions, drunkenness and gluttony, and so on. But others Proverbs express God's compassion towards the poor. That God cares about the poor, and He commands us to have compassionate heart towards them. Proverbs 14:21, blessed is he who is generous to the poor. Proverbs 14:21, but he who is generous to the needy honors him, talking about the Lord. 19:17, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. 28:27, whoever gives to the poor will not want. Proverbs 22:9, whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor. The problem with the person in verse 21, or chapter 21:13, he who shuts his ear to the cry of the poor, he lacks compassion. It doesn't say he doesn't give him aid or help them. He won't even give them the time of day. He won't even listen to them. When we think of the poor, we most often see dollar signs, or probably more a lack of dollar signs. But the Bible, when it talks about the poor, can not just talking about their economic status in life. They can mean downtrodden, sickly, those of little influence or recognition in the world. They don't have much of this world's good. They live simple lives. They're people society tends to avoid or look down on. And Jesus identified with this particular kind of poor. He said he was meek and lowly in heart. He came down to the downtrodden. He who was rich became poor for our sakes. He humbled himself and became a man. And so I want to think about this verse not simply about a certain class of people, but maybe people who are just in our path and needy, and for whatever reason have been stricken with poverty, not because they were lazy, not because they were drunks, not because they were drug addicts or lazy or wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, but they found themselves in a situation that the parable of the Good Samaritan describes for us. And Jesus told this parable in response to the question, who is our neighbor? And let me read the story just to refresh your memories. This is the poor man we're thinking about today. Jesus replied and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by chance a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, also when he came to the place and saw him, pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion, and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them, and he put them on his own beast, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. So there's this man on the side of the road. His clothes have been taken, he's beaten, he's left for dead. And the story says that all three people saw him. They saw him. They looked and saw this man laying there, beaten, half naked, almost dead, destitute, alone. That's the poor person. We don't know his social status. We don't know if he was rich or poor. All we see is a man that's half naked. All the things that would indicate his status in society, whether he was rich or poor, maybe he was a ruler, maybe he wasn't, but all of those things have been taken away from him. All that could be seen at that moment was just a poor man, a man who needed help, a human being. Two people saw him. they passed by on the other side. But what more would they have needed to see before they would have helped him? You see, the problem was not what they saw. It was what they didn't see. It was who they were. They were proud, they were religious, but they didn't see a man who would help their status, or they didn't see a man who would be easy to help, who would take little sacrifice. They didn't see a man who could repay them for their help. They didn't see a man in their own social circles. So they would not roll up their sleeves and care. But the Samaritan, they saw the same things the other two men saw. Now, what does it tell us about him? Nothing. All it tells us is that he was a man on a journey. Was he rich? We don't know. Was he upper class? We don't know. We're not told. The significant thing is that we're told is that he was a Samaritan. And the man who was beaten up was probably a Jew. And for a Samaritan to help a Jew was almost unthinkable. But what did he have that the others didn't? He had compassion. Compassion. And Jesus says the point of this story is that your neighbor is anyone in our path with a need. Which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell upon the robber's hands? And they answered, well, the man who helped him, the Samaritan. And I think we can expand this proverb to say this, that there are people with legitimate needs who, through no fault of their own, are struggling to get by by day. Sometimes the poor, maybe just those who have been hurt by others or robbed, as this man was. He wasn't generally poor, but he was a man in need. His riches aren't doing him any good now. He needs somebody to help him. He's destitute. He's half dead. He's naked. He's got nothing. He may have something back home, but he doesn't have anything right now. And he's someone to help him right now. There's all kinds of people we could put in that class of people. Maybe somebody's been laid off from their job. Maybe they've had an accident and they're unable to work. It could be a widow. It could be a single mom. Some may be struggling because of sins done against them, and so on. But look at the Lord, those the Lord brings into our path with his eyes, compassionate eyes. Look at those the world ignores. As we think about the Samaritan for a minute, many make the assumption that because this man had a donkey or a horse or paid for his care and he paid for his stay at the inn, that he must have been a rich man. But that is an assumption. That's an assumption Scripture doesn't tell us. We aren't told all we are told is that he had compassion. That's all we're told about this man. Compassion will find a way to help. Let me say that again. Compassion will find a way to help. Our ability to care for and love our neighbors, or those people that God has brought into our path that may be struggling or poor, need help. Our ability to care for and love our neighbors is not linked to our bank accounts. And as I said earlier, we need wisdom in this regard. But he who shuts his ear to the cry of the poor is not a hearing problem. It's a heart problem. And he also says that he who shuts his ear to the cry of the poor will also cry himself and not be answered. As the old saying goes, what goes around comes around. So may this truth guide us and guard us in the trenches of life, that we might live our lives to the glory of God and the good of others. May God bless.